Here we go. So this is the start of our second, we're going into our second subject area, mysticism and science. And tonight we're going to cover in part what I did with Bruce's brother, Ron Cowan. And the title of this is The Case for a 26 Real Dimensional Universe. Not 25, not 27, it's 26. So we'll see where in the world this crazy number comes from, I hope. Now, Ron, from looking through what he wrote, apparently was able to carry out his microcosm perceptions starting in the middle 80s. And he continued right up to his passing on in August of 2019. And I worked with him from 2016 through when he passed on. And I've been repackaging and reinterpreting, hopefully for the good, what's he saw there. So that's what we're going to try and cover tonight. Really his
backtrack from
his observations.
who weren't
Okay, backtrack.
What do you mean by micro observations?
Sure. So what we saw in the earlier classes, in the class before this, there were two people, Charles Leadbeater and Annie Besant, who wrote a whole book, which was published in 1908, but they started work on it in 1894, 1895. And they were able to meditate very, very deeply. And this allowed them to basically peer down into the microcosm, into what were atoms. And they discovered that atoms consisted of electrons and a nucleus. And the nucleus consisted of what we're calling protons and neutrons today. And the protons and neutrons each consisted of three quarks, three different types of quarks. So there was that side. And then they discovered that the quarks themselves are each made up of three quarks. And that was all done prior to people even having an idea of what the atom was made up of, let alone down at that level. And they carried out a series of observations on 92 different elements that make up what we call the chemical periodic table. And were basically by and large right on the money. And they discovered that some of the elements had what we would call isotopes, where the number of protons is always the same as the number of electrons, but the number of neutrons can vary. You can have more neutrons, and that leads to isotopes. And the example we used was the hydrogen atom, which has one proton, and when it has one extra neutron, we call it deuterium, and when it has two extra neutrons, we call it tritium. And those are widely known and so forth, but they basically discovered all this before anyone knew anything whatsoever. So
you would meditate on mineral samples in museums or any place that they could find them.
And they
referred to the periodic table as it existed at that time, but they were adding new elements.
Yeah, and they checked each other. Oh yeah, everybody should go on mute just so we don't have interference. So let's see. So that's our background to this. And what we'll see is that Ron Cowan actually came across this work of Leadbeater and Besant and was able to replicate it. But he went far beyond what they did. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
And explain Ron's background.
So Ron and Bruce are identical twins, you're what, 20 minutes apart in birth? I guess you're fraternal, not identical.
I'm the oldest one. I'm 20 minutes older.
20 minutes older, okay. And you grew up in what, Western Canada?
Alberta.
Alberta, wheat fields. And just a sec. So everyone is muted, right? Oh, wait, no, here. Okay, I got it. Okay, now we're all muted.
Oh,
And then at some point, Bruce, you came to Toronto with Ron. And Ron was a high school physics teacher, but you're both into Buddhism and both became monks.
I didn't.
You didn't, Ron did?
Mhm.
And
For a while.
right. And then he veered off into doing these observations.
Yeah. Well, he was a complicated person. I mean, he was very helpful for me in my earlier years.
Right. And no, I enjoyed interacting with him. I never physically met him. We just talked on the phone multiple times every day, just trying to sort out what he was observing. And we're not going to cover everything that he observed, but you'll get a flavor of it. It's going to be very different than anything you've seen in our other classes. So what we're going to do here, our methodology is going to be to take observations. So we're going to actually look for real data, real observations, but we're going to follow Occam's razor. The simplest hypothesis is going to carry the day, the simplest explanation out of all the possible explanations we could have. But we're going to condition that. We're going to be Bayesian and condition our observations on all the other past observations that we got. So there's lots and lots of observations that people have made, and that's going to drive us in a particular direction. So the observations we're talking about, we talked about Leadbeater and Besant, and they actually observed what today we would call subquarks. They called universal physical atoms. So these are the smallest things that people can find that make up the worlds around us. But what they missed was something called dark matter, which two astronomers discovered, one in 1933, looking at galaxies twirling around galaxies, so clusters of galaxies, and the other one in 1970 looked at one galaxy at a time, and they both discovered that as they watched these things spin, that if they just were spinning the way they thought they were, and they made assumptions about how many stars there were in each and what the stars had for an average mass, then gravitation alone would be impossible to explain. The galaxies would just go flying apart from one another. And there had to be some other matter there, which they simply called dark because they couldn't see it. It's probably transparent is a better way to talk about it, but dark matter is what's the common buzzword. So those are not under dispute. Everyone agrees there's dark matter to go with matter. And the reality is that 85% of all matter is dark matter. There's far more dark matter than matter. So where is it? If it's that prevalent, where is it? Now, what Ron did, which was different than Leadbeater and Besant, was Leadbeater and Besant never saw dark matter. They only saw matter, and we have no idea. It's a quirk of their observations, but Ron was able to see both dark matter and matter at the subquark level, and we'll see what those look like. And his observations, again, not only confirmed what Leadbeater and Besant saw for matter, but what other people saw, which we'll see. Then we go on to this thing called dark energy. which Edwin Hubble, as an astronomer, saw. He saw that all of the galaxies and all that are out there in his observations were all flying apart from one another. And if they're flying apart from one another, then it was felt this was due to something called dark energy. I mean, why are they flying apart? What's pushing them? There's some sort of entity there, which was called dark energy. And dark energy actually makes up 68% of all the mass and energy in the universe. Dark matter makes up 27%, and matter makes up 5%. So the dark energy is by far, the greatest entity out there, and we don't have a clue what it is. Finally, the observation that Ron made really through all of his observation was there's something which he called information, and information involves the algorithms and the storage of data. And this is what, in fact, is prevalent everywhere in the universe. And this ends up controlling all the forces and particles that are out there. And information is the control knobs on it. It allows you, the standard example that people use is if you're a yogi, how can you levitate? Well, the yogi can actually meditate and go in and trigger the information, and the information will allow the yogi to lift himself up off the ground by controlling the force of gravity. And many, many examples of this. So it goes. So those are all observations. Then where's the Bayesian piece? Well, we started with Newton, who was looking at 3 spatial and 1 time dimension, which led him to his theory of gravity. We then went off to where Einstein had 4 dimensions, but space and time were now on the same footing. They're coupled to one another. And after Einstein did this work, a chap named Kaluza approached Einstein and said, if you take your 4 dimensions and add an extra dimension, I can get both gravity and electromagnetism, which was an interesting observation, but it didn't go anywhere. And everyone asked themselves, where was the other dimension that Kaluza was talking about? And they determined it could be just a very compact dimension, a little, very small, rolled up dimension that is around us, but we just can't see it because it's so small. So this was extended in the 1954 timeframe by Eugenio Calabi, an Italian mathematician, and Xingting Yao, who's at Harvard, in 1979 actually fleshed out what this had to look like. And so right now there's thousands of these, probably 10,000 of these compact Calabi-Yau manifolds or spaces. So that's all solid. Then we go to Richard Feynman, who was one of the great physicists of the 20th century. And he had a class at Caltech that he ran, and he just started looking at how you could come up with a quantum theory of gravity. And the key thing he looked at was having a graviton, a particle that would carry the force of gravity, and it would have a quality called spin. And because it was a graviton, the spin could be an integer number, 0, 1, 2, 3. So Feynman worked out that it was impossible to have any spin 0 or spin 1 theories, but a spin 2 theory looked like it was possible, but he didn't know what to do with it. He just dropped it there. So in 1971, another physicist at Rutgers ended up playing with this, and he came up with a set of equations that would describe what was going on with the spin 2 graviton, but they all failed until they got to 26 dimensions. And everybody scratched their heads and looked at this and said, where in the world did this come from? They checked out all of his analysis, and it's all right on the money. So why in the world do we need 26 dimensions? Then we go forward in time with the advent of string theory, and two individuals, Ed Witten and Andrew Strominger, showed that it's likely that there might be a 10 or even an 11 dimensional space. And therefore we take our 4 space-time dimensions, and if we have a total of 10, then we have 6 compactified dimensions that we have to deal with. And they were able to show a number of things about that. But basically, no one has included this notion of information controlling the forces in particles. Only Ron observed this, and really, it's a seminal observation that is. You read every physics book, you won't even find this in it. So, what did Leadbeater and Besant actually observe? Here's some pictures they drew of their observations of these. As you see down at the bottom here, this is universal physical atom, or we call it a subquark, and it has 10 strings. The 10 strings run around. They're all closed. All the strings close upon one another, but they're carefully spaced, and they're all nicely intertwined. And there's one that spins in a positive direction and one that spins in a negative direction. And that's what they observed. But this is only for matter. They weren't the only one to observe this. There was another chap, Babbitt, who in 1878 had a similar picture. He also came up with what they observed, and he did it the same way, but he was hesitant to talk about it a lot. So if 2 people have done it, or 3 people, then probably lots of other people have done this, and they just don't know what in the world they were seeing. They don't have the framework that we have today. So then we go pick up on this dark matter just to amplify it. Here we see a galaxy that's spinning around here. And if you look at it and make some estimates for how many stars there are here and what the stars have for mass, as they spin around, they have a certain angular momentum, and if it's too great, they just go flying off in some direction. And the assumptions they made about the number of stars and the mass of the stars over a wide range, they couldn't possibly make this thing stable. They needed to have a lot more matter here. Remember, we said there's 5 times more dark matter than matter. So there's a lot of things here that we're not even seeing. And this was done by, like you said, for this cluster of galaxies that happened to be called the Coma cluster. And was also shown for just a single galaxy rotating around. In other words, this dark matter is everywhere. There's other things beyond this, though, that if you take a look at what's called gravitational lensing, when people look far away, light will get bent by gravitational fields. It gets bent too much. That means that the dark matter, which is interacting through gravity, is shaping the light. It's focusing it, it's bending it, and that's unavoidable. When people did all kinds of studies of the cosmic microwave background radiation, they concluded that there had to be a lot of dark matter that was simply being ignored. They couldn't explain their measurements. And then the final thing that they pointed out was the dark matter, because it just relies on gravity, it'll start to form structures. It'll start to clump together very quickly. Whereas with matter, if there really was a bang of some sort at the start of the universe, there would be a lot of radiation floating around, and radiation pushes things away. So it was the only way to have things really get going is to have a lot of dark matter there. And so all of these reasons meant that something's really being missed here. The dark energy side of things, I mentioned Hubble, who in 1929 showed that the stars and galaxies are moving away from one another. But it was reconfirmed, and the guys were given a Nobel Prize in 2011 for showing that not only were they moving away from one another, they appear to be accelerating faster than we ever thought. So these are all things that are driving modern physicists, modern particle physicists, cosmologists crazy. They don't have a clue as to what is causing this. So what did Ron do? He ended up, first of all, duplicating the observations of Leadbeater and Besant, and there were some errors in their book, which is probably just due to the draftsman not understanding what they said. But anyway, it just showed that there are 10 strings there that make up these things. And what Ron observed also was the strings appeared to be made up of neutrinos. This was unknown. Then the next thing he did was he observed this information which is covering these fundamental particles. So the electron, which is a fundamental particle, is actually covered with 10 strings, which we'll see. Or these subquarks are covered with 10 strings, or protons and neutrons are covered with this information as well. And this information is always scanning all around it, but the scans take place in these compactified dimensions. And when anything changes in position and velocity, then everything reacts, everything senses this with the scan and scan and scan, and this controls all the fields and all the particles that are there. This is totally new. No one has ever seen this. Then we have that Ron looked at dark matter, which Leadbeater and Besant did not see, and he saw that these subquarks there had 5 strings, not 10. The key thing about dark matter is there's nothing like an electron that's there. There's no charge associated with dark matter, so it only interacts by gravity, which is a key difference. Then Ron observed there were 2 types of dark matters. There were active forms that were, when they got close to something that was thermally active, say that they were on a star, or they were on the surface of a planet that had volcanic activity, then they got energized. They got energized just due to heat, jiggling them around. And this allowed them to interact with matter, and they could get close to the matter because, remember, they had gravity. They could actually get attracted to matter. So the dark matter in its active form could interact with matter to do things, which we'll see later on is important. But when there wasn't a lot of thermal energy to keep the dark matter active, it was quiescent. It simply shut down, didn't really do anything. And this is floating, what Ron observed is all over the place, all through space, which is consistent with the observations that we saw by Zwicky and by Vera Rubin, that there are tubes out there of this dark matter that are just hundreds of kilometers long, and it's just sitting there drifting around, and at some point it'll land someplace on a star or on a planet and get heated up and then become active again. So that's it. Another thing that Ron did was he looked at the major chakras, and we're going to go through those tonight, and you'll see what the chakras look like. And it appears that these are made up of dark matter, which ends up joining the body at birth and leaves it at death. And then finally, Ron made a lot of observations on the Big Bounce, which is what started the universe. It's not a Big Bang. And we're going to discuss that not here, but we're going to discuss that in section 7 when we deal with cosmology and astronomy. So that's, just keep that in mind. There's a lot more stuff that we're just skipping over. So let's start with Ron's first observation on the electron. So what do we have for an electron? Ron observed, we saw this 10 string here entity, and the electron is actually a torus. It's a donut. So you see the hole down the middle. Here's the hole down the middle. And if I climb up here and look down the hole, I see this thing over here. And the strings are wrapped around this torus. And you can see them all wrapped around. Now the thing that's new here, well, first of all, no one has any idea what an electron looks like. You can read every book you want to. This is the first time you'll find any description of what an electron looks like. Even though we use electricity every day, try and find a picture of an electron in any of these books. Now, the information that we've been talking about is on top of, on the outside of the electron, and it's actually inside this torus here. And so this is both the algorithms and the data that the electron is always using to scan. Where am I? What is nearby? What is far away? And it acts on this information accordingly with these algorithms that are here. So that's number one, the electron.
Oh, Bart.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to share, Ron was very excited about the information thing. And here's how he described it to me. He would be able to watch an electron traveling through space, and it suddenly disappear, and then let it reappear again. And he concluded that it expanded to infinitely through the universe and came back. And what he observed that came back were little bars of information that when it expanded.
They were here, these bars.
Yeah, and it had all the information that it scanned, just and came back. He was very excited about it, so he talked to me about it a couple of times. And
Yeah,
I just wanted to share.
Yeah, the thing that if the electron physically expands, it has to do it in a very, very short time scale, because no one's ever seen it do this. Okay. But the scanning that takes place that's always going on, scan. That's taking place in these compactified dimensions. But we don't have any instruments that work in those compactified. We'd never see that. Okay. So it's both these things are fundamental. The fact that the electron could expand briefly and then shrink back, and then the scanning is always taking place all the time.
So I have a quick question for you, Bart.
Yeah.
Does the electron spin on its implied axis, the torus, at the same time that's circulating around in the atom?
It can be spinning up, it could be spinning down. Where I define, if you take your thumb and stick your thumb, right hand, stick your thumb up in the air so that you have the rest of your fingers are curled around, going counterclockwise. Okay, that's this. But if I do it the other way, it's spinning down. Okay.
Right.
It can spin up, it can spin down.
So it's doing what I would consider to be multiple spins at the same time.
It is.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it's actually doing little wobbles. There's lots more it's doing. I'm just skipping over it. So now we go to the next thing Ron looked at, which is he actually looked at these strings that we're talking about. We had these 10 strings there. And it turns out that the strings, here's a string running through here, which he called rope 1. And but when you look at it, what you see around it is another string, okay? And when you look in that string, you see there's curls in that. And if you actually look in this thing in any depth, you have to go down 7 levels, okay? The strings are very complex and have all kinds of little curlicues in them, which leads to what we call the sacred geometry here. But the strings themselves have this incredible structure. So the thing to keep in mind, here's 2 examples, two simple, we haven't even got going yet, But here is evidence of there's a hand at work. There's a greater entity, a greater consciousness that has come up with, this is the way to put things together. I could never come up with this. So, I mean, take a look at this. This is just amazing, the structure that's here to make everything work. And similarly with these strings, the strings by themselves have incredible structure. And there's a reason for that. I don't know what the reason is, but it just shows that there's a greater entity at work, a greater consciousness that's doing all this stuff. So that takes us to the proton as our first kind of more complex thing. This is, again, pictures that Ron put together. So the proton here is made up of, again, 3 quarks. One quark is called an up quark, a down quark, and an up quark, okay? So which he's labeled over here. And the things that are shaded are the positive subquarks, and the thing that's blank is the negative subquark. So this subquark here has the total charge for this thing, for this up quark, is 4/3 of the charge of an electron, except it's positive. Electron is always negative. And the charge here, sorry, this is 2/3 of the charge. This is 1/3 of the charge, but this is a negative charge. This is 2/3 of the charge. So 2/3 plus 2/3 gives me 4/3, and this is a negative 1/3. So you have minus 1/3 plus 2/3 plus 2/3, or a total charge for the proton of +1. So it exactly matches the charge on the electron, but it does it in this complicated way with these 9 subquarks that are there. But what Ron observed was that it's even more complicated than that, that these subquarks that are here inside, here's this proton here, they actually bunch up so that some of them appear to be on just 1/2 of this hemisphere and some on the other side. And since there's 9 of these and there's a bump here, I have to believe that 5 of these are here and 4 of them are over here. But the thing is vibrating around like crazy, okay? And he said violently rotating, okay? And so we have 9 fundamental particles here, but each of these hemispheres is also covered with information, okay? So we have 11 things in total that are doing scan, 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 and whenever they detect anything, then they act on it. Okay, no one has seen any pictures like this ever. You're the first ones to see them. So that's what a proton does. Now let's go back to this neutrino, which we saw that the neutrino is just huge numbers. Every second that we're sitting here, there's hundreds of billions of neutrinos flashing through you. So Ron actually looked at the neutrino. This has never been seen before. And he saw that the neutrino, again, has this donut shape to it. You can see here, but it's got some of these, and here it looks more like a pumpkin down here. But here's looking down on top of it. Here's this hole in it. So everything is a donut here. Everything's a torus, and the things are rotating into these two hemispheres that make this thing up, one on each side. And the things that are rotating around are the information flows in these things. So the neutrino sitting there scanning, 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 trying to see what in the world is going on. So we have a neutrino as a fundamental particle. This was never seen by Leadbeater and Besant. Probably they wouldn't know what it was because the neutrino didn't really show up until 1930. The next thing that we had was that the neutrinos make up the strings. We saw that ordinary matter has strings with 10 strings in them for the fundamental subquarks and so forth, the electron. But the strings are made up of ordinary neutrinos, matter neutrinos. There are 5 strings that make up the dark matter subquark. And these are smaller, and these are different. These are shadow neutrinos or dark matter neutrinos here. So they're different. Ron observed this. There are other people that think that strings ought to be made up of things besides neutrinos, but Ron's observation showed this. The next thing is I mentioned that the dark matter subquark had 5 strings. Well, here's a matter subquark that has 10 strings. And here's what Ron observed down here for a dark matter subquark. And there's only 5 strings here. You get thrown off because, see, the strings go around multiple times. You've got one layer of strings up here, one layer of strings that spiral down here, and then it spirals back up to the top, as you can see. So there's really only 5 strings here, whereas this one with 10 strings, as you can see, it's intrinsically much more complicated. So here we have pictures of things that people have never seen before. And then Ron looked at what carries the fields everywhere, and the fields are carried by bosons. We saw an example of this was the photon. And so Ron looked at this and he saw that it kind of looks like a Christmas tree ornament here. But it actually has, when you do a cross section to it, it's actually hollow in here, and you have these two different paths, and the information flow goes running around these two things from top to bottom, bottom to top. That's what he observed. So here we have what an actual boson looks like. This is the thing that would carry the electric field or the other nuclear forces. So let's go back to the information. Ron saw there at least, I have 4 different pictures here to show you. So he saw, for example, on the outside of the electron or on the outside of these subquarks, he saw blocks of information. So the blocks look like little Lego blocks that are there. But when he looked at them in detail at a particular block, they're actually stacked up. And so he drew a picture of a stack. And what he saw was that information would move around from a leaf on the stack to some other leaf. You know, it would just go hop, hop, hop. But it looked like a wave that was going right down the stack. And what then happened was he looked at it in greater detail at the wave, and he discovered that there was all kinds of things rolled up there that he did another picture of. So far, these are all the building blocks that we need, you know, to come up with our theory of everything. So we'll see what happens. We mentioned that there were these compactified dimensions, and we saw that they seem to cluster into 6 dimensions. And there's 3 of these subspaces. But what Ron observed was that the 6 dimensions each have a particular entity that they deal with. One of the 6 dimensions deals with electrons. One of them deals with protons and neutrons, the quarks, the subquarks. So very, very different. One of them deals just with the compartments that make up space, the quantized compartments of space. Now, these are all on the microcosm level. And all of a sudden, we have a dimension that just deals with the galaxies. The galaxies are all in sync here, are all using their own special dimension to convey information. And there are clouds out there, clouds of dark matter, clouds of plasma. When you look at astronomical pictures, you'll see all kinds of clouds everywhere. And they have their own channel here. And then finally, the very final dimension is the thing that deals with the big bounce. So this is something that apparently deals with our universe cycles back and forth. We bounce down to something very small, and then we expand out. And at some point, we start to collapse back in on ourselves again and again. And this is the thing down here that seems to control that. So we'll come back to that later on. But this is what is going on here with dimensions. Now, Ron was very active in looking at what he called mind forms. Bruce suggests that a better definition of this would just be consciousness. So what happens here is that these subquarks for dark matter, they're matter, just like these are dark matter, we're matter, and yet we're alive. Well, if we're alive, why can't dark matter attain sentience? Why can't dark matter attain the notion of some sort of intelligence? So what happens is the dark matter starts off as this rudimentary tree here, and when it gets to a critical size, it just starts to glom onto more and more dark matter very, very rapidly, and it comes out going from the thing on the left to the thing on the right, which looks like a gigantic fern, but it's actually still this graph. There's a root here, then there's all these branches here, and that's what's hidden here. Many, many branches and so forth. But when all is said and done, even though this looks gigantic and is mushroomed here, remember that this is just a fraction of the size of the nucleus of the atom. And remember that the example that we used before was that if we looked at an atom of matter, that the electrons would be running around on the walls of a building the size of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and the nucleus would be the chalice on the altar. So all of this, even though it looks huge, doesn't take up really any space whatsoever. It's incredibly dense matter, and it achieves what we would call consciousness. It's sentient, but beyond that, we don't really have a lot to say. The one thing to keep in mind is, remember, this lives forever. There's nothing that's going to go kill this off. And so if you could imagine having billions and billions of years to contemplate, to think, you could end up with some truly mind-boggling sorts of forms here. So that's another key thing that Ron observed. I'm going to go over to his book on the chakras, and his book is up here in this top corner here, and he is a whole chapter devoted to the chakras. So I'm just going to flip to that now. I'm going to get out of the screen share and go over here to this thing. Then I'm going to go back here. Okay, so this is from Ron's book on, this is, like I said, part 7, the chakras. So he did what he called a sketchy investigation of the evolution of intelligence with the chakras and nadis that evolved to their present forms long before any biological life took shape in our solar system. So they had literally hundreds of millions, billions of years for them to go do their thing. Now, I'm going to see if I can skip through this. So here's what you do, a picture of what he saw the crown chakra looking like. And it clearly is something that's, again, made up of this dark matter quarks. But the tree that we saw before now has attained this sort of structure for this crown chakra. The third eye chakra here is incredibly complex. You see these kind of line of beads here, and they're all connected in some way. The throat chakra here, he's showing, again, a very complex structure. The heart chakra, so this intertwines right through the heart, but it's in this other subspace, so we don't see it. The water chakra, which is hidden behind the fire chakra, is just shown here with this dotted line. The water chakra has this oval shape, this is the sexual chakra down here. He didn't do one of the female. This is a male. And the root chakra down at the very base has, again, these grass-like structures that we saw before that are that come out of this aggregation of this matter. So the root chakra looks like this when you really get down to it, which is just incredibly complicated.
So these are side views,
Yeah, these are all side views of these things, okay?
because they're said to be really like spirals or cones projecting out.
I'm just saying what he showed for his drawings.
Did you
He
discuss it at all?
he put it into his book, okay? This is his Kundalini here, which is clearly something bizarre. And this structure here that contains the Kundalini, this hollow structure. So these all appear just in his book, but this is the sum total of what he put together on this. Okay. The root, the base of the root chakra and so forth. And that's the end of it. So let me just get out of this. So Bruce, did you have any comments on, did you ever talk to him about these observations on these chakras, on the nadis and any of the stuff?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't see him myself, but he was telling me about him and he was showing me the diagrams. But that's about all I remember.
And he didn't really spend a lot of time on it. I mean, you can see what he wrote up in the book. It's clear it was going to take him decades to try and figure out what in the world was going on there. And, you know, we were able to make a lot of progress because we had a structure in mind for guiding our observations when we were trying to sort out all these particles and fields and the geometry of the universe. But we don't have that for the chakras. We don't. At least I don't, you know.
Yeah. Well, they were just part of his nonverbal understanding of the mind and the body. I mean, these are just things he sees every day.
Right.
I mean, it take a lot of effort and a lot of observation to kind of put some information together of how they actually work and all that. He didn't really do that, but he could see all these chakras quite effortlessly.
Right. Right.
It's just part of his perception.
Can you remind me how he saw these things? I mean, what was the activity
Sure.
that allowed him to see these things?
Right. Well, he did the same thing that Leadbeater and Besant and other mystics have done after he spent approaching 20 years of being able to meditate. He was able to develop a special skill, which was he would focus just on a button on his shirt. He would focus on the button on his shirt and just start to drill down into the button. And as he got deeper and deeper, he went all the way down to the atoms that made up the button. And then he went down beyond the atoms to the nucleus that made up the nucleus of the atom and started looking there. So this was all done, again, just through meditation. And this is what we saw Leadbeater and Besant did this 100 years ago. He duplicated it. And we saw that other people, we showed you the example of Babbitt, but there's others. There's a guy named Jeffrey Hodson in 1959 who has the same picture as Leadbeater and Besant. And there's lots of people that must have observed these things, but they didn't have any framework for trying to see what in the world am I observing?
Was he a physicist?
Come again?
Was Rob Cohen, was he a physicist? Did he have a
He was a high school physics teacher. Yeah.
Yeah, you see, that's the thing. I mean, what he did was actually use the tool of insight meditation, and he used his training as a physicist to understand the nature of reality. I'm sure other people have seen it, but because you don't have the physics training, you wouldn't know what you're seeing.
Yeah, it gives you the vocabulary or
Yeah,
the
well, that's
framework
very
to
essential.
describe
Yeah.
what's going on. That's why when we talked about the chakras, we're kind of through. We don't have any framework, you know, to say anything at this stage. We need to spend, you know, decades trying to figure out what is the right framework for even beginning to talk about these things.
Well, if we have to reinvent the wheel, you know, from scratch in the West, I think we could ask some people.
Yeah.
You know, just been doing it in caves for thousands of years.
Yeah. Yeah, undoubtedly, many people saw this before. We're not the first. So I'm going to go back now to the presentation here.
I think there's so many things that the West is beginning to catch up with.
Well, just to give you another thing
Take
that
it-
I don't think Ron talked to you very much about, but he sure talked to me about it, is that he could look into somebody's mind and see their previous karma.
Right.
And it's very helpful for me because earlier in my spiritual journey, he helped me define my karmic history. It was
Sure.
incredible. And
No,
Yeah.
no, it is. So let me just skip ahead so we'll see. We talked about the Yoga Sutras. Okay, so the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are 195 of these sutras, and they're broken up into 4 books. So most of what we discuss with yoga is the first book, which is, I think, 51 sutras. But there's the other books. So if you go to book 3, the title of book 3 is called Mystic Powers. Now, this was probably written around maybe 200 BC, we're not sure, but it was passed down orally for millennia before that. And I'm just using this particular source of this chap, Edwin Bryant, who did this. So let's look at what these mystic powers are. This is straight out of the Yoga Sutras. You end up, in some cases, with knowledge of the past and the future. The knowledge of the speech of all creatures. You remember Harry Potter could talk to snakes? Yeah, the snake language, whatever it was. So then you have knowledge of previous births. Ron had this. He could sense how you'd previously incarnated. You had knowledge of others' minds, what they were thinking. You could actually achieve invisibility in some cases by just blocking out the contact with the light reaching your eye. In some cases, you had knowledge of when you died. You can become very friendly, make people want you. You can end up with the strength of an elephant. You have examples of people lifting up cars under incredible situations. So they draw on this sort of ability here. You have the knowledge of the subtle, hidden, and remote things. Well, that's what Ron was dealing with. He was dealing with the microcosm, the subtle, the hidden, and the remote. These are things delving down into the nature of the atoms. But you also had the remote things out thousands of light years away. You had the knowledge of the different realms of the universe. You're looking all around, or you could go to other moons and planets and stars, or you actually understood how they moved, or you understood a lot more about how your body parts worked, how they moved. There was no need to eat or drink. There are examples of yogis out there that eat nothing for years and don't go to the bathroom. They have the ability to become immobile. If someone tries to move you, forget it. You're there like a rock. You have the vision of what it means to become a perfected being. So you can actually have an idea of where you want to go. You end up with an incredible intuition about the knowledge of everything. You have the knowledge of the mind. And then the distinction between self-intelligence and pure intelligence. This is a subtle difference. You have intuition in the higher touch, taste, vision, and smell. You had the ability to enter the mind, enter your mind into the body of someone else. You can levitate, you can glow, you can radiate, you can have divine hearing, you can have the ability to travel through the sky in your body, or you can project your mind outside your body, out of body experience. And then we get toward the end of this, so the earth doesn't get in the way of obstructing your body. You can just walk through anything. Water doesn't make you wet. Fire doesn't burn your body. Wind has no effect on your body. And the ether cloaks your body so that you're invisible. These are all things that over the years people have attained. And there's 8 of these things. One of them is the ability to shrink in size, which makes you invisible because you're so small, no one knows where you went. You can make your body light, you can make your body heavy, you can attain anything that you desire, and in particular, you can attain free will, and then you control elements, and you control other people, and you can control your outward appearance. So these are all things that you find in the Yoga Sutras. And Ron was an example of this. Any comments, Bruce?
Yeah, that was just part of his natural understanding. He was also telepathic, and I'm also telepathic, so there's a lot of dimensions in telepathy that are amazing.
Right.
Most masters in Buddhism have all these psychic powers naturally. It just occurs naturally, and they don't really show them to anyone. But if you have a transcendent mind, basically you have all those qualities.
Yeah, I mean, again, I viewed it as it's somewhat of a distraction, but you're able to do all these things.
Yeah, I'm going.
What time? Just a minute.
So a question.
Yeah.
When it comes to controlling other people's minds, that strikes me, I mean, this is kind of a discussion topic for me. It strikes me as being problematic that you could do that for good or evil purposes, and who's to define what is good?
I'll give you a concrete example of that, okay? In World War II, Hitler chose to attack the Soviet Union. And it was clear to his generals that were there after a while that they could very well lose this. So several different generals at different points in the war went to see Hitler to explain to him that they had to come up with a different plan to try and extricate their armies. They're all going to get slaughtered. And every single one of them, after meeting with Hitler, came back and said, you wouldn't believe it. He made it all so clear to me. I see now why we should stay here and continue to fight. Okay, that's an example of using it for evil.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I don't know if Hitler, there is a, from what I understand, from my training, that the Buddha never encouraged any of this.
He didn't. In fact, it's not even encouraged in the Yoga Sutras.
Well, yeah, but you know, it's he says that all you're looking for is freedom from suffering. If you're going to start getting attached to any of this nonsense, then you have a very high risk of a very low rebirth, because then the self takes over. And in who knows what happened in Hitler's case. I mean, he certainly damned himself for a long time with his karma. But you know, the stories of Milarepa and Rasputin, all these people who've had a lot of powers. Milarepa actually turned it into, he was a black magic sorcerer, and then he turned it into, you know, he flipped. But my point here is that that in the Satipatthana Sutta, which is the path for the purification for all beings, which is the Buddha, supposedly comes from the Buddha, and the words are from the Buddha. This is not encouraged talk. This is not even talked about.
So just to ask,
So that people don't get hooked to it.
The Yoga Sutras are just simply saying these are all attainable, and they're neutral on the topic of how they're used.
They're probably negative on it, but what Nina is saying.
It's a distraction.
Yeah.
Well, that's a very big difference between Hinduism and Buddhism, actually. In Hinduism, there isn't that ethical dimension that's ever discussed. You know, and it is, I mean, the Hindu Brahman and that whole culture was extremely dry and cruel in many ways, because you were getting what your karma was given. This is what the Buddha said. This is all nonsense. Everything can be subverted. We're all equal here. Let's get this together here. That's a huge difference between Buddhism and Hinduism, because in the Hinduism, you attained these powers and you could use them because there wasn't that ethical background given. The Buddha said meditation comes after morality is solid. He did not teach meditation to people unless there was a full moral training prior to that.
Right.
In the West, we teach meditation left and right as if it doesn't matter. But that's not what he did. And that's the big difference between Hinduism and Buddhism.
So
Thank you for that.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate the discussion.
You can go get Ron's book, and then you can go get the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and you'll see all this stuff. I'm not making any of this up. I'm taking it literally verbatim out of these books. So.
I've studied this stuff also with Bhikkhu Bodhi. He refuses to talk about these things. He says this happens, but he doesn't get involved in any of it. He says this is all nonsense. Yeah. This is not what we work for.
Yeah, you had people like Uri Geller who would bend spoons, you know, so forth. So we're going to continue with what we saw before in the earlier discussion. We had this standard model, and what we see is there's a bunch of particles over here on the left-hand side and a bunch of forces on the right-hand side the forces are associated with fields, a gravitational field, an electric field, and so forth. So that's what we have. This is our basic standard model. It's been this way since 1973, kind of 1975. It was cast in stone, and it's what is there today for matter. Now, what we have with what Ron saw was that there are these two quarks, up quark and down quark, and then they have, it turns out these are resonances of these two. And the reason why there's two of these here, 3 total for each of these, is that there are 3 holes in that in the compactified dimension, that the 6-dimensional space that is attached to our matter space. So we end up with really, there's just one up quark and one down quark, and then a bunch of resonances. They're excited by these holes. Then we go down to the electron, the same thing's true. The electron has 2 more resonances, and the neutrino has 2 more resonances. These are all due to, so really there's only an up quark, a down quark, an electron and a neutrino, and we saw that the up and down quarks are each made up of two types of subquarks. So this is everything. There's only that many particles that we have. There's only 4 really fundamental particles for matter. Over here we have the fields. So we start with a photon, but actually the photon gets energized, okay, into resonances. These two and this one up here are really different types of resonances. So there's really only one photon, and it resonates up there. So there's only really one field here, and then there's this crazy Higgs boson that gives everything its matter that's over here, which we just pointed out is there for sake of completeness. But the Higgs boson doesn't have any resonance that we've ever seen. So that's where we start from. But this is incomplete because it only deals with matter. It doesn't deal with dark matter. So what in the world do we do? Well, if that's the case, then instead of this thing here, we just have one subquark here. And with dark matter, there's now 4 holes that in the compactified space that connects to the dark matter space. So we end up with 4 of these, not just 3 here. We end up with 4 total, four resonances, but there's really only one subquark. There's no electron, and there's a neutrino, but the neutrino has a total of 4 resonances. And similarly, the photon is the only thing that's here, and there's a special type of Higgs boson that is due to dark matter. So we've now got a much more complete picture of matter, dark matter, and the fields that are associated with it. This is incredible order that comes out of all this stuff. This is what is called string theory, which we touched on before. So it's dealing with the oscillations or vibrations of all these strings that we saw. The strings are on tops of these different particles, and they lead to resonances, and the resonance lead to literally 496 types of particles. The picture we've got there is a very simplified picture that the things are bouncing all over the place. And what goes with it is there's an underlying symmetry to this, which is this exceptional group which has 248 elements in it. But if you think about it, what I said was that we had this 26-dimensional space, but there's 2 dimensions for time, one for matter and one for dark matter. So if we take those 2 dimensions of time out, we have 24 spatial dimensions. And if we think of those as each as 3-dimensional spaces, then we have 8 3-dimensional spaces, 24 dimensions total. And that's where this thing comes from here, is the number 8 that's sitting here. Now, what did Ron observe on top of this? There's a big discussion here on what is called quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics is intrinsically a probabilistic view of the world. You calculate something called the wave function. You never do anything with the wave function other than look at its magnitude squared, and that is interpreted to be the likelihood of a particle being in a given location in space and time. Well, that's all very interesting, and no one doubts that quantum mechanics is not true, because we've used this to build the modern electronics that we have based on these principles, and the modern photonics, so lasers and light emitting diodes and so forth. But the thing about this was what Ron observed was information scanning, and that controlled how everything behaved. So once you detected that things were moving in some way, you took an action on it. And therefore, this is exactly what we saw in the movie last year with David Bohm, where he talked about an explicate and an implicate order. The explicate order is what we see, but there's an implicate order that's hidden from us, and that's the information that Ron observed, or the physicists would call it hidden variables. But this controls everything. And because this is controlling everything, there's nothing that's random anymore. The whole theory is probabilistic. So it's how we interpret this that has to change. And there's a lot of work you'll find with a chap named Bell, who had a notion of randomness that led to all kinds of interesting things, except that the basic assumption was that it's random, and Ron observed that it's not random. So it's irrelevant at this point. So the key thing we find here is we calculate this function called a wave function in quantum mechanics. And the one thing about it is it has a real and imaginary part in space and time. And the only thing that I could think to come up with here is that the matter and the dark matter spaces are really closely related to one another. The matter space has an X, Y, and Z axis and a time axis. And the dark matter space appears to be having its own X, Y, and Z axis and times, but they're all multiplied by the square root of -1. Mathematicians call that symplectic. I have no idea why, but it allows you to end up with a single, instead of having 4 real dimensions for matter and 4 for dark matter, we end up with 4 complex dimensions, a real and imaginary part. And apparently one would think that the real and imaginary parts of this wave function would exist in the real and imaginary subspaces of matter and dark matter. So that's what we end up coming up with. So this is Ron's experiment that we did numerous times. This is his double slit experiment where he took an electron and he shoots it through a single slit. This shows 2 slits, but if there's only 1 slit, you just get a single line here. But if there's 2 slits, then you end up with this diffraction pattern over here showing that it's acting like a wave, okay? And we saw a YouTube video on this. So what did Ron draw? Does this look familiar, Bruce? Here he shows the electron, and the electron is scanning. Okay, but here it's expanded. It's a torus, as we saw, but it expands dramatically in size. But it's also doing its scan of where things are, and it detects that there's now 2 slits here rather than 1 slit, and therefore it goes through this as a wave. Even though you see an electron here, there's 2 slits, and you end up with a wave interference pattern on the other side. So this is totally mind-boggling that this is what's really going on.
Is he saying that it's the same particle in its expanded state?
What Bruce said, what Ron saw was he saw the electron expanding from momentarily. It's very quick. It expands and then it shrinks.
Right.
But the scanning, that's the only question I've got. And was it the scan that he saw? The electron stayed here, and is this the scan that expanded? Is that what he saw, or was it really the electron that blew up? Now he was adamant about the electron blowing up, but we didn't spend enough time looking at how these scans really took place. So to me, it's plausible that this could be the scan of the electron scanning everything around it, and all of a sudden, and this happens faster than the speed of light, so it gets over here and then comes back.
But it's not actually going through the slits.
No, the electron is still here. The electron now realizes there's 2 slits here, and it now turns into a wave going here to give you this wave pattern out here. Wave interference pattern here with 2 slits. When there's only 1 slit, it won't do anything different. It'll just go right through the hole.
Because it doesn't do that expansion sensing
No,
thing.
no. Bruce, any comments? No, you're still muted.
Sorry. When the electron expands and gets information, like that's happening everywhere with everything. So I kind of sense it sense that this is how there's union in the universe. The whole universe
You know,
is
everything is coupled. These scans
Yeah.
are all coupled to one another,
Yeah,
as we saw in the matter and in the dark matter subspace.
everywhere.
And then there's
right?
a synchronization between the two and yet another 6-dimensional subspace to make sure everything is still on track.
Yeah, it's a different dimension of reality, of where everything is in tune with everything else. That's how I kind of got it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
to our minds, it seems like an altered state.
Pardon?
Does it seem like an altered state that the electron enters into when it's doing its scanning activity?
No, it's not an altered
No.
state either.
No.
At all. It's just natural reality of how it works, something like that. And
Yeah.
it understands itself perfectly. That's how I get it.
But it's scanning. It seems like it's because there's a change in the situation or in the environment.
Yeah, instead of one slit, there's now 2 slits, or there's another electron coming at you, or whatever it is. It's
But if
detecting this.
if there's just one slit, it just goes through it as a particle because apparently it's not scanning in the same way.
No, it doesn't need to, it's still scanning. It doesn't need to do anything. It's always scanning. The thing I wanted to pick up on here was the fact that
But
this,
is it kind of caught in the act of scanning when there's 2 slits? That it's registered as a wave rather than a particle because of the scanning activity.
no, the scan is instantaneous.
Right.
It's faster than the speed of light. So all of these things are being detected and coming back instantly.
So what changes between the 2 slits and the 1 slit?
That the electron, as soon as it detects there's 2 slits, will turn into a wave. And part of the electron will go through 1 slit and part will go through the other, which is what a wave can do. A single particle will only go through 1 slit.
Well, but it's not really turning into a wave.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Or is it just being?
No, it's really a wave. That's what why words don't encompass what we're talking about. It's a wave and a particle.
Right.
And so it's a wavicle, but that doesn't mean anything. That's where the breakdown in language occurs. The other thing
But if
that,
it happens in coincidence with the double slit, it may not be that the 2 slits are causing it, but they're recording it.
no, there's a large body. This is where people do electron microscopy. It's using electrons. Just instead of light, you use electrons so you shoot electrons at things, and the wavelengths are much shorter, so you can get a much finer grained resolution. If you used light, you'd get things all blurred. Okay, when you're trying to use these things.
That thing we read said that
Right. So the electron really is acting like a wave. It really is, and there's all of this working machinery that shows that. It's just that we don't have anything in our vocabulary that would allow us to talk about how it could magically change from a particle to a wave.
So what happens if you have 3 or 4 or 5 or infinite slits?
Well, if you have more slits, then the more slits you have, the more interference patterns. It'll just continue to be a wave, but it'll be going through more and more slits and have greater numbers of interferences and destructive and constructive reinforcements of the wave pattern.
All equally dispersed?
Yeah, it'll be, it'll depend upon how are all the slits the same size? Are they all equally spaced? If they're off a little bit, you start to see artifacts in this way, but it all behaves just like a wave. There's
Gotcha.
no notion of a particle at that point.
Well, is it possible that a wave is just a complex series of particles, like a drop of water in an ocean?
But we just saw what the electron is. Which part
Yeah,
do you
yeah,
want to
yeah.
take apart?
Okay, good. Okay. Thanks.
Now the thing I skipped over here, which I didn't want to lose sight of, was again, quantum mechanics leads to these calculations that work, because we do have lasers and we do have solid state electronics with transistors. And this is all based on our knowledge of quantum mechanics. But how we interpret it is a different issue. And the thing that happens in quantum mechanics is you always calculate the so-called wave function, which is never what you want. You want to look at this at the square of the wave function, which is actually the likelihood of some event occurring, whatever it is. Is a particle here, is a particle there, what is going on. And this appears to be what happens in enlightenment, that you're actually plugging into this wave function, which is the universe's wave function. So it goes everywhere. And you're sensing all the possible things that could happen here in the universe. The wave function will contain all possible things. It'll, something that's 87 light years away, some star hopping up and down. Well, it's 87 light years away. It won't really have any impact on you compared to something that's 2 inches away from you. But it's still there. That knowledge is still there of anything at the far reaches of the universe. And this leads to this notion of certitude, that you have this incredible certainty about what's going on because you're sensing all the possible things that are reflected in this wave function. You're resonating with this universe describing function. So let's go on. Yeah, so the thing that we saw here, which was the study of symmetry, and when we looked at symmetry, there was this huge amount of work done by literally thousands of mathematicians, and they ended up classifying symmetry into 18 regular infinite families. Okay, and that covers just about everything you could possibly imagine. But there were 26 exceptional, or what they called sporadic, groups that were left over. So again, the study of symmetry led to a lot of symmetry, but then some oddball cases, of which the most bizarre of these was this monster group that was in 196,883 dimensions and has little under 10 to the 54th elements in it. So the question that always comes up is does this have anything to do with physics? Because every time this came up, the fondest wish of physicists is that someday we'll know enough that we'll find some reason to have this 196,883 dimensional space. But as we sit here today, we don't have it. But I just flag it as something that could happen. Now, the key thing to keep in mind with what Ron observed was that this information structure, the scanning of everything, regulates everything that we see around us. So we just talked about the particles and the fields, or the forces that are there, and that's the study of physics. But chemistry relates directly to that. Chemistry is dealing with the aggregation of these things in the components. So we end up with compounds of different sorts. And biology, some of the things that we deal with attain what we call life. But underlying it all is this notion of information. And there's two different hierarchies here, one for matter and one for dark matter. The primary difference on the dark matter side is there's nothing like an electron. So the chemistry we're dealing with is the chemistry of the subquark. Subquarks form those trees that we saw, and they have all of these other entities there, and they somehow achieve sentience or intelligence, but in a totally different way than we do. So that was the thing. We talked about these Calabi-Yau subspaces, and these are pictures that are taken. I actually found on the web, you can actually find programs where you can generate your own favorite Calabi-Yau manifold. These are all two-dimensional pictures of something that's higher dimensional, 3, 4, or 5 dimensional Calabi-Yau manifolds that end up here. So just to go back to reiterate this, why did we come up with 26 dimensions? It was because of the work by Feynman, where he said that we needed a particle called a graviton to account for gravity, and it had to have at least spin 2, and that the spin 2 graviton, the simplest model that came up for this, required 26 dimensions. I have no idea why it takes 26 dimensions. I don't have any physical argument. It's just that when you turn the crank on the math, the only time it starts to work is in 26. So really nothing more to say. And so the fields that we're talking about, which are bosons, run around in 26 dimensions, but the matter and the dark matter run around in 10-dimensional subspaces. And that's how the game is played. So the key thing that Ron saw was our space has we have 4 space-time dimensions, and then a 6-dimensional subspace that has 3 holes in it. And the dark matter has the same thing, but it has a 6-dimensional compactified subspace with 4 holes in it. And at the bottom, synchronizing everything, is a 6-dimensional subspace that has 8 holes in it. So the 3 holes that are in the matter subspace have to link up. The 4 holes that are in the dark matter subspace has to link up. And I think the final hole is actually linked into time. The time is floating around there. And then there's some interesting geometry here, which I'm going to skip over on this Hodge diamond for describing curvature. But the key thing to keep in mind is that every time we look at these pairs of axes, an x-axis, a y-axis, and a z-axis, there's another one that's multiplied by the square root of -1 in each of these 6-dimensional compactified subspaces. So I have no idea why you want to go do this, but it's how everything seems to work. And the thought that I had was maybe there's actually extra time dimensions. I just throw this out as an idea. I don't think that this is really the case. I just think there's two time dimensions. And hold on one sec. So the rest of it is the information side of things, that there's this so-called principle of least action, that everything follows this path. So everything in the universe follows a path of least action, whether you like it or not. And this is, again, a highly deterministic. In fact, it's better than that. It's called super deterministic, which I can skip over. But the point is that the information is really what's calling all the shots and controlling everything, and is always working through this scan and response activity everywhere. I pushed around repeatedly on this because I couldn't, because quantum mechanics includes a high degree of uncertainty, and he just didn't see it. There was everything that he saw continually was was deterministic. There wasn't any roll the dice and this goes here and that goes there. It was just what.
So that
which
means there's no free will.
you think what?
That means if everything is deterministic, that means there's no free will. This is what my teacher says too, and I don't understand it.
Well,
I don't understand. I don't claim to understand it at all, but he doesn't say that there is any free will.
Well, there's freedom and there's will. But then the question is, when I pair those together for free will, I end up having a lot less free will than I thought I did.
Yeah,
I
I
still
haven't
think,
thought enough about it. I know that, there's a book by this guy on, I'll find the book. I read it and I didn't understand it. And last year I suggested perhaps we could all read it together, but I have to find it. I've forgotten the name of the guy. And it's about free will, in that how we don't have it. One thing I do remember from the book is that whatever you're going to say or do is already in your mind before you do it. So how can there be free will? That action is already in the mind and it's happening, and then you act on it. So it's on a pre-verbal level. But I can't claim to say I understand it. All I know is that my teacher is constantly saying to me, there is no free will. No control and no free will. No control I understand, but no free will I don't.
so what if you don't go to see your teacher? Is that free will?
No, I want to be free. I'm going to go see him no matter what. That's something he's my rock. I'm not leaving that one.
I understand, but that's the test. Is you just say, as you get into the car, you say, I'm not going to go today. You get out.
Well, my teacher, Nam Rinpoche, made an interesting comment about free will. He said, if you look at the mind, there's lots of freedom and there's lots of will, but the will is not free. Now, it took a long time to figure out what he meant by that. Basically, when you have a realization mind that is not conditioned, then that's the mind that has vast compassion. That's how they talk about it. What else? Oh yeah, Siddhartha's primordial wisdom. I'm still working on that. But basically, the actual will of anyone is a very deep level of your own mind, and you simply can't find it because of the conditioning. But yeah, so that's his comment on free will.
So you have the appearance of free will, but you don't.
Well, if you look carefully at it, what does it really mean? I mean, if you look at somebody that you know very well, all their idiosyncrasies and personality and the whole thing, and like a husband or a wife or a sibling or something like that, and you look at their mind and you've known them for years, I mean, where's the free will? Can that person be something totally different? No. It's like in my view, it just simply doesn't exist unless you have a few masters that I've met. Their compassion is so vast and their love mind is so vast. They instantly know how to help somebody. I mean, that's certainly will. I don't know whether they call it free will, but they can certainly do things that most people can't even imagine.
No, that's a good point, Bruce.
But there's no self there. In that situation, those people are free of self.
That's correct. No self.
Yeah, if there's no self, and certainly one experiences that in meditation from time to time, then there is so much freedom of movement and so much love and so much care. It's when we become constricted and become the self, that is where we're really, it's like this.
Yeah. The other thing that comes along with that is that you're in union with the universe. In other words, it's like the mind is instantly perfect about what it sees. So it kind of like the concept of free will in that context just simply doesn't have any meaning at all. But it does mean there's no self. And it means there's incredible realization, especially in terms of compassion.
Mhm.
So what? That's one of my favorites. I always had a problem with the King James and Thou Shall, and East of Eden, Steinbeck's. The Chinese philosophers translate it as Thou mayest, free will, but we learn in AA that it's all a paradox, that we turn our will and our lives over to the care of God of our understanding. We have more freedom than if we don't. I love it.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was thinking about the case of healing and growth, psycho-spiritual growth and healing. And to me, it's a mystery. How much freedom is there in there? How much choice do we have in peeling off the layers, we could say, of separation, and illusion, and achieving clarity and freedom? It's like we can take more. It's like there's a light switch that's taped it down into place when you're stuck in addiction or stuck in a compulsion. And we can make choices that take off more tape or put more tape over the switch, But I don't think we ultimately control the light that goes on or doesn't. It's very mysterious, but I think we have contributing choices. Jung said free will is doing gladly that which I must do. So there's some part of you that can detach enough to kind of voluntarily do what you have to do. I always tried to be in touch with that, making really important life-changing decisions in my life. For example, when I came back to Connecticut, I had been in New York my adult life, and then briefly in Vermont when I came back to take care of my mother after her mini stroke. Some part of me never could have made any other decision. I thought I didn't really like it here in Connecticut. I didn't want to be here. I wanted her to come to Vermont. But then I read that people at her age, she was about 80. She had lost my father after, about 50 years, and had had this mini stroke that she really wouldn't live long if she was uprooted from her environment, and especially from her community. And that's what she didn't want to leave her friends, most of whom were her age and going through the same kinds of things and dying. And I just realized at some point I really had no choice. I couldn't choose to just leave her behind or put her in an institution and go about my life in Vermont. That wasn't on the menu for me. For other people, I'm not condemning other people who do make that choice, but with my relationship with her and my makeup and so on, and I have 2 siblings with different degrees of disability, I had to come back to the homestead. And that opened up this whole chapter of my life, including the Unitarian Church, and I would put meeting Bart up there in the list of significance. But that was a very full circle in my life, including my relationship with my mother. She taught the American Transcendentalists, in an integrated high school here in Norwalk, Connecticut, which is a very integrated community. So it was all kind of there unconsciously, and I didn't know it all consciously, but even seeing all the ripple effects that came out of that, I couldn't have done anything else for my development. So it's as if it was fated. It might as well be fated. People always ask me as an astrologer, do we have free will? I can't really, you know, Jung's answer is the best that I've ever heard. Me with my makeup, my relationship with her, my closeness to her, I couldn't have done anything else. I couldn't have lived with myself if I had done anything else. And it wrought havoc on my life. You know, I've paid a very high price, you know, with what happened about 10 years in, and I'm still paying the price. It's affected my health. And, you know, I ended up in this battle royale with powers that be that I never would have, I wouldn't wish on anybody. You know, I don't know, but it's somehow it's fulfilling. I don't care so much about karma because it's just so unknowable. But there's some kind of dharma for here for me to do, and that's what I really look at. That's more forward looking, and it's more about what. So that in a way, it involves choice. What are you going to do given your givens?
So just to go way back to what we're talking about here, we're just showing this incredible structure that Ron, through his observations, uncovered in the nature of the microcosm, and it's far more. We're leaving out a lot of it, but it just shows there's an incredible hand at work here. There's an artist. There's a set of algorithms, whatever you want to call it,
And a mathematician.
that is shaping all the structure around us, and is, you know, inconceivable that this was accidental. That there's some greater entity at work doing these things. We'll get more into this when we come back around the corner and doing the cosmology section as well. But I think this is a good point to break, and we'll come back to this. We'll do a review next time of what we just went through, because I know it's a lot of stuff to chew on and give you a chance to go think about it. But the observations are what drive everything, and that leads to the structure and to these questions that we're coming up with. Anybody want to chime in with anything?
I'd chime in that my distillation of this is that free will is the self-delusion that we choose to do what we must do.
So that you're playing Jung. You're
I know.
Right. Okay.
Thank you, and the glue that holds this group together. Peace and blessings.
No, it's, you know, I view this as a highly mystical thing, trying to deal with these things, you know, which we're talking about here. But this is the world around us.
Who is it who said, well, we have to act as if there is free will? You know, in terms of taking responsibility.
Sartre?
I believe it was one of the existentialists. That's what I would have said. But I you know, how much there is it's just kind of an open question. For me, it also helps me be less judgmental of other people who very often I don't understand their choices.
Yeah, like Trump. Yeah.
One of the things that I look at is, well, this is my own personal experience, but when it comes to vast heart, mind, and compassion, I mean, free will doesn't have any meaning.
Right.
I mean, what do you mean free will?
Well, but then how does one overcome something like addiction, you know? And how do we evaluate that? How do we, you know, where do we place our compassion and our
Well, the thing is
discrimination and so
is that-
on? for
look what
people
Nina
to
said.
do it.
Yeah. Well, you look at what Nina says, it's basically when having a self or not having a self. If there's no self, I mean, free will doesn't have any meaning because it's so tangible, so it's full of certainty and
Right,
kernels
there's
of things like
no
that.
duality. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, like it's wow, you know. But if you're struggling with what I like to call a conditioned mind, in other words, from karma or family conditioning, from society, and you're kind of internalize them because there's a self, well, then you got some work to do. That's, you know, and eventually we'll get through it, but that's all it is. It's just conditioned mind. Whereas,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
And the other thing that I just flagged in this, the reason why I spent that time talking about the chakras and the nadis that were there was it to me, it appears that the sum total of these chakras is what makes up your soul. And that's what resonates with your brain to give you this duality that you have. If you're able to overcome the resonance with your brain so that you can in fact be enlightened, so that you lose the duality, because there really is only one soul, then you've gotten somewhere. But what's left as an exercise is, how in the world did these chakras get into your body at birth, and how do they leave at death? I have no idea.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If you don't have free will, I would think you could be led by anyone to do anything.
Well,
And
you're saying the other person has free will. The person who's leading you has
you
the free
have
will.
free will to say, no, I am not doing that. This is what I'm doing, or I believe, or, you know, I'm not following, because it would be against my ethnic to do something, let's say something evil, or as Marjorie would say, no, I'm not coming back to take care of my mother. My life is mine. I'm going to go here. She made up her mind to do what was, she felt in her heart right to do. I don't know, maybe. And I noticed I got a new mouse because my thing froze up, and I'm not computer savvy. So whatever that name is up there, could that be because this is made in Japan?
No. I think if you go into Zoom, you can edit your name. So you'll see, like our name says Bart and Marjorie. Go into the settings on Zoom, and you'll be able to erase that. And
You're
it's
talking to somebody who isn't computer literate.
I'll take a look on my Zoom after class, and I'll tell you where to go to go do this. Okay.
Okay.
To clean it up.
Participant,
There's an interesting line
Right.
between predestination and free will.
Okay.
It's kind of, it's intriguing because without free will, you're suggesting, or one could suggest that there's predestination because of your opinions and your mind conditioning. But I don't happen to believe in predestination. astrologically. I think that all you're dealing with is influences, which give you choices at certain times. So when you are provided with a choice, you actually have free will to choose one or other paths. So it's just kind of an interesting philosophical question for me, listening to everybody's discussion here, because I think there is both free will and a certain amount of predestination in terms of influences causing you to choose at various points.
But it seems like we get rewarded when we make the right choices, you know.
And
we always
what
have
are
these
right choices?
The things that we get rewarded for are the right choices. It seems like if we make the wrong choices, we get punished, and if we make the right choices, we get rewarded. I don't know.
Anybody
Well,
else?
sometimes the punishment can be an educational lesson. So that then becomes the right choice to receive the punishment to
Careful
be
what you wish
educated.
I
for.
don't think you can look at it as punishment.
One of
It's
my
just
friends
learning. It's just a learning.
Exactly. It's
one of my
learning.
You can't look at it as
My-
punishment because then you're setting up yourself to beat yourself down. It's a learning.
one of my friends in AA says that good judgment comes from experience. Unfortunately, most of my experience comes from bad judgment.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, the only time they really use free will is when you've done something wrong. Like in the justice system, everything depends on because should have known better. You have free will, so you did something wrong, so now you have to be punished. It's incredibly stupid.
Right.
I'll offer, what for me seems like a nuance, which is that there's what we do and what we must do. And perhaps our, quote, free will deals with the things that we do, but less so with the things that we must do. And it might seem like we have choice in the must do, but I will speak for myself in my own life. There's no end of things where I know in the grand scheme of things, I have choice, but it does not feel like I have choice. And I do what I have to do, period, without regard to what people say or think or consequences. I feel I must do this, and I do it. And that seems radically different in my experience to other choices, like the three little piggies. One built a mud house, a stick house, and a brick house. That to me seems to be free will choice that people make. And I think that if you had enlightened and unenlightened souls that needed shelter, they'd have to make a choice whether they were going to build it out of dirt or sticks or brick. It's a choice without regard to one's state of enlightenment, and somehow or other that needs to be made.
I think that's an excellent observation.
Having looked at this for around 30 years as an astrologer, it's a recurrent question with clients. One teaching is that our free will is before we're born, choosing the time and place of our birth, because then from then on there's a certain amount of built-in predestination. But and another answer is that we're always free to, in our inner response to our experience. Walls do not a prison make. We don't have to be oppressed by our situations. our consciousness can always, on that level, we have free will. And in our inner response to our outward situations. And what I'm trained to see when I look at a chart is the inner experience of the person. So I don't necessarily see their outer circumstances clearly. When I'm looking at it, I see what they're likely to be experiencing inwardly. But it does still seem there's a path of least resistance for what's likely to happen and what you're likely to experience. But that's not written in stone. Your experience is not written in stone. That's where your free will is in your consciousness. And another thing that's taught is that the level of the expression of the chart isn't written in the chart. And that's where the free will is. So it can be more constricted or less constricted. But Hindu astrology is very deterministic, but people swear by it. And it's consulted in arranging marriages that a lot of people feel ends up being better than what they would have chosen. And I for one, I can understand that it just feels right. I feel that Bart and I now are almost in like the equivalent of an arranged. It just feels like some matchmaker determined it. You know, and I hope everybody is lucky enough to feel that way. But Bart says all the time, well, it was predestined. It was meant to be.
Because it was.
But I think it's up to us to work with it, you know, so and the level that we work with it on.
There is another thing that I just finished my work on last week. And that was wherever you are, there it is. Because that's how it is. Because if you're abiding in isness,
right,
that's the way it is. So we could come up with any kind of theory around it, which is what the rational limited mind tries to understand, right? But at the same time, if you understand the vastness of the universe, and you understand that this is just a flow of isness. Being is a flow of isness. So we are always where we are meant to be, irrespective of whatever your theory might be. So the Buddha is actually cutting down the theory and saying, abide in isness, because that's all that there is.
And as if there is no choice.
Well, yes, and also to, you know, maybe the rational limited mind is always looking for an answer. Can we let go? Because it's this human life, this incarnation is completely a mystery. And can we, when we want to know, the surrender to not knowing is what will allow you to see better. It's never going to be the mind, the limited mind, or the intellectual mind trying to look for an answer. So let go of the proliferation. The word he uses is papancha. You know, let go of the papancha around it. And just abide in the isness of it, because whatever it is, that's the way it is.
Right.
And in every society, we come up with different models of how to understand and construct life. But actually, you know, you come out of a retreat. I did a retreat last week. You come out of a retreat, all it is experience. All the verbs just go away. All this talk goes away, because it's all, you're living the life of an experience flow, which is what being is. And we've only been really talking for 20,000 years as a species. So now we think that, you know, we know everything because we stood up and we evolved. The brain hasn't still evolved to be able to function on the level that the stress that we're put under. But, you know, we think because we have evolved and we are higher than other beings because the brain has developed and we have all these things, we've kind of forgotten that the ground level is just being an experience. And he's telling you to forget about it, use it as a tool when it's necessary, and flow with the experience. When you flow with the experience, you're completely hollow. There is no self at that point.
Yeah.
And he's asking you to be hollow, because it's in the hollowness that that life is lived. That's where there is no self. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, it's a mystery. I've just given up. I'm never going to know it through the conditioned mind. Never.
Yeah.
Well, I
I give up.
I get that you're saying there isness and there's monkeyisness.
Say that again?
Isness versus monkeyisness.
Yeah. Yeah. And we want to know. Of course, that we're dying to know. I'm dying to know. But I figured out after doing this for God knows 26 years, I ain't going to know. And my mind still wants to control it. It still wants to go out and get it, grasp it and find out. It's not going to happen.
It might happen tomorrow, Nina. You don't know.
I don't know. This retreat was pretty damn terrible. Let me tell you that. I could see by my mind going, want to know this, want to know this, want to know this. It's like it just didn't want to surrender.
Yep.
You have to completely let go and say, it is the way it is. I'm abiding in isness. There is no I at that point, but you're abiding in isness. You're living just the isness, the verbing process. In fact, there is no Nina or Bart or Steve or anybody here. These are just nomenclatures we put to faces and forms. What is happening right now is seeing. We're seeing each other. Everything is a verbing experience. There are no nouns in life.
Right.
At any moment of experience, it's only a verbing experience. Thinking, cognizing, seeing, touching, tasting.
Yeah.
So do you think if it is predetermined, certain things are preordained, predetermined ahead of time when we're born, that we humans, because we can't answer some of these questions, that's why we made up this dualism to try to explain the unexplainable, and also not face the reality of that life is just going to flow and it's going to happen and we have no control over it. And so we make up this whole other universe of, which is not really, I guess, the reality, but we make it up to go along, to somehow go, well, what? Because we can't understand it. So we come up with this dualistic concept that we all basically, I mean, not everyone, because some people are able to escape that, but it's a small percentage of people. And some people may escape it for a short period of time, but then they come back to, the dualistic society and all of as Bruce just said, the conditioned mind, because it's what surrounds us too. So it's hard to probably live without the self in society. If we were maybe just living in the woods on our own, we probably could do it a lot better.
I don't remember exactly where I encountered it, but it works for me astrologically, but I don't think that's where I first encountered the idea, is that we can at least choose the level of our experience, the nature of our experience. We can feel totally victimized and passive and as helpless of bugs in a jar, or we can write our own story and our journey, and well, at least find the meaning in it.
Yeah,
and that's what our free will is. We may not get to determine everything that happens and when and how, our children may have terrible afflictions, and it breaks our heart, and we wouldn't want it that way for anything. But it's how do we meet that experience. That's where our free will is. You know, it may be written whether that's going to be the case or not. And, you know, so when I look at a chart, you often do see things that seem like, you know, a very harsh fate. And I'm not willing to sit and say it's karma, it's, you know, retribution. But it's, some people are able to create a frame around their experience that's more liberated, and others are more oppressed by their circumstances, by their situations. So I think it's always in our consciousness, how free can we be from you know, being totally broken sometimes by what's happening. And it's how we rise to the occasion that seems to be handed to us. You know, and it could be illness, it could be loss, it could be all kinds of things. You know, Bart's adopted son grew up in, you know, horrendous circumstances. We probably, none of us know anybody who grew up anywhere in the world having those kinds of experiences as a young child. Did that happen because he was a terrible person in a past life? I don't, that doesn't really get me anything as a hypothesis. I don't see the justice of giving him that, but it's still the question, how can he rise to the hand that he's been dealt? How can he learn to play that hand?
I really like your thought that the way we face things is part of our free will, maybe all of our free will. I've often thought about, where does free will lie? Is it in the conscious? No, I don't think so. Is it in the subconscious, or somewhere in that veil between the subconscious and the conscious? And what we do, what behavior that we normally have is suggested by someone when they're talking about punishment and reward. That's strictly behaviorism, and that's how some behaviorists would say, and I'm no longer a behaviorist, so I'm no longer saying that, but the sum total of the way we behave is that we are conditioned to do so by our pattern of reinforcement and punishment. That's too simplistic for me anymore. But a large question for me, working with abused children in my own experience. First one, I'll just share a little bit, because this has been a thing that's been on my mind for a long time, on the idea of free will. I chose to not live in poverty. I chose to be the first of anyone in my family before or after me to go to college, and I chose to do that as an adult. In order to do that for children or humans at any point of their life, and in order to change their way of being, seems to me takes a lot more than conditioning. It does take an element of that free will, because what you have to do, and I always tell children, when you make this decision, you have to realize you become the other. If you use your free will to make a dramatic life choice, do we choose to be the other? Because it's a myth in America that, in my opinion, in my experience, it's a super myth in America that every parent wants their child to do better than they do. For people in poverty, there's very real reasons why that might not be true. And for a child to use their will to say, I'm going to be the other, I'm going to extend my life beyond that, has to be something more than consciousness, in my mind.
Okay, go ahead, Nan. And go ahead, Nancy. Yeah, you got your hand up.
Through Edgar Casey and several others, what I learned was we chose to come here to learn something. And so you are giving these, do you want to call, to learn. So it's how you react to those things and learn, the soul learns, and then you go on to something else. we may have chosen to come here. I don't know, I say I came here to learn love. Someone else may have come here to learn something. I mean, everybody's learning something. I'm not good at explaining things. But you come to learn. You either learn it, you don't have to learn it, you go on, you may come back again. I believe in reincarnation. So you may come back and learn it. You may come back next time and learn something else. You may go somewhere else. I do not believe that we're the only beings. There's 300 billion universe. We can't be the only one that has life on it. That's all I can say. You know, from what,
Thank you. I like that. But how do we determine what it is we need to learn? Is that predetermined, or is that a product of self will, freedom of self, the ability to make a choice that involves your being?
you came here to learn. Your soul has to be satisfied with what you're giving and how you deal with it, and how you progress. I don't think you're what do you want, punished for not. I look at it that we make our own heaven and hell. I don't look at that I'm punished for something that I didn't do. I would be punished for things that let's say, I decided to kill somebody, which in my upbringing, that is a sin. I would look at it that I would be punished for that. Maybe I would come back the next time and be murdered because of something I did. I look at one hand washes the other. You pay for whatever you pay the consequences for whatever it is that you do, whether it's good or bad.
So do consequences alter sense of self? Do consequences alter the possibility of free will?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
We live in a world that's full of conditioning, and the consequences of our behavior, the consequences of our thoughts. So if we choose to share it, does that alter your will? Does that alter the way you look at freedom of will? I may not be expressing myself clearly.
According to Edgar Casey, how you think is how you become. So if you are constantly thinking in the positive, you become positive. If you are constantly thinking in the negative, you become negative. It's your responsibility, if you think you're being negative or being wrong, to change it.
Yeah, I agree. It is. And I think that's, if there is anything, there is free will there. And I think if we're learning, we're also, there is a beautiful book by this monk who's actually not very good about women. But I've sat with him. I mean, I'd have problems with the way he deals with nuns and stuff, but that's besides the point. He wrote this book called something suffering. I have it here. I forget. I mean, I've read these books long time ago now. He talks very much about, we are caught in this gravitational vortex, right? And when it's time for us, when we want to wake up and be free of suffering, we actually pull ourselves out of the gravitational vortex. Because that's what the whole issue about non-attachment is. And, you know, my own experience says that I did this practice for 5 years. It does me now. I don't do it. I just see it for what it is. And, you know, the attachment to sensory world, I'll be done in 5 minutes. Okay, baby, bye, good night. I don't know.
You be done by
No, 1 minute. So what was I saying? Yes, so when what happens is that the attachment to the sensory world becomes much less. You're grasping for much less. You're wanting much less. And there is a beautiful sense of enoughness that just permeates you. And life becomes alive, and that's enough.
Nina,
And that actually pulls you out of the momentum.
Thank you for that, Nina. I'd like to share with you an experience that I was.
Who is this?
This Barbara, me talking again. Sorry.
Yes.
Something that highlights that to me is an experience that I was privileged to have. Spoke to a survivor of Auschwitz, and he now creates beautiful blown fused glass butterflies for the Houston Museum to support education on the Holocaust. He was talking about a day him and several other people were in the yard and a butterfly fluttered through. And his experience of the butterfly was freedom. And the image of the butterfly and the images of the butterfly he created everywhere when he could create a butterfly became the symbol of freedom for everyone that he talked to, according to him, you know. And I believe that to be true. I mean, I don't see how that can impact you in a positive way. But it was profound that, you know, one experience and the way the individual experienced that experience could have so much, I don't even can't think of the word because it gets me emotional, has so much impact on other souls.
They were also at Auschwitz?
Yes.
You see, what there is I've forgotten the name of people. But he worked with Jack Cornfield, who was also one of my teachers. He runs some kind of a prison project down in North Carolina. And his experience was that people who are in dire conditions learn much faster than you and I. And what they find in meaning in things and is radically, what's the word? Stronger. Because they know they're in this particular situation, it's confined, the outer circumstances are very, very difficult, and if they don't learn, their survival depends on that learning. So their rush for freedom is extremely strong, it's accelerated, and they're learning much faster. Now the question is the learning for the self or is the learning to be free? That's the question the Buddha asks. Because if you're learning for the self, you're back in again.
Well, one of the things I like to, what helps me, we're talking about the nature of consciousness and where it comes from and all that sort of thing. I'd like to share with you what I've discovered. It's a basic Buddhist concept. And that is when you have volition based on ignorance, it leaves a momentum in the mind that leaves a formation in the mind in the next lifetimes. Now, apparently to the theory is that if it was very, serious, like killing somebody or getting killed, where there's a very severe leftover formation in the mind, if everything else is equal, it actually disappears in 5 lifetimes because the deeper mind knows how to resolve it. So this is my basic idea of karma. Karma always has a cause. When you have negative formations in the mind, they all have a cause. And all those causes can be transcended. So it's So you can intuit it, when you see somebody who's, experiencing anger all the time or fear all the time and things like that, you can sense that it has a cause. Now, you may not be able to get the details of the cause, but because you know it has a cause, well, then compassion arises instantly already. I don't know, it's sort of like that. But basically, the idea of negatives in the mind is that they all have a cause. Everything that has a cause
Yeah,
has an end.
yeah, causes and condition. That's the nature of life. That's what sets the momentum. In from what I understand, once you achieve stream entry, which is in the Theravada tradition, which is that you're what I talked about. You're in the flow of the experience, right? And you have witness consciousness. You're able to actually see your own mind do its own dance.
Yeah, in stream entry, that's where you have your experience stream mind.
Right.
It's basically free of some of the major problems like
Defilements.
skeptical doubt and stuff like
Yes.
that.
Right.
But when you get into the what there's once returner, no returner, and
Right,
arahant.
exactly. Then you have 7 lives. They say
Yeah.
if
So
you make stream entry, then you have 7 lives. You said 5, so I was a little confused about that.
So then is it,
But the thing is, if you look at the arahant, the last 5 fetters disappear. There's ignorance, conceit, restlessness, and the
Sloth
other
and
2 are to
torpor.
do with clinging to samadhi or something, or jhanas. But anyway, when they disappear, that means the negatives that are holding you back have disappeared, and then you have natural mind, or in terms of Mahamudra, but in terms of the Theravada, you're an arhat.
Mhm,
But it basically means the negatives have been resolved.
mhm.
That's how I look at it.
Yeah, and you actually, yes, right, absolutely. But another way that I've been also told is to just not identify with it, because when you're actually seeing impermanence, you're seeing everything flow through you. There's no fixity, right? So when it's a movie, if I'm watching a movie, it's really hard for me to say I'm identified with this movie that is on the screen. Right now, it's only on the screen of my own mind. So
Yeah.
it's like watching a movie, and that is what you really have to make very stable. You get caught, and you're going like this all the time.
Yes.
Till you're
You
not
have-
going like this. You're saying, okay, anger has arisen.
Yeah, you
I have
have to do
my
it.
mother moved in right now, and it's like crazy. She's,
You have to meditate a lot,
a lot. I mean, it's really beautiful practice.
But this is a great discussion. I think we've set a record for our class now. It's 2.5 hours.
2.5 hours.
So let's call it a day, and we'll start again a week
Thank you.
from now.
That was fun.
Judith, did you see the thing I put in the chat for you?
Yes.
Okay, so I think you can go clean up your,
Okay.
yeah, okay.
Thank you.
I don't know what
Thank you. It's so
language
nice
that
to
is.
be with like-minded people.
All that happened was the key, something got stepped on the keyboard. All the keys just started spewing out what you see there. That's where it came from.
Okay.
So don't worry about it. Okay.
I want to say,
Good
I
night.
just love the way we've gone from, the minuscule to the exalted, and everywhere in between, and really come back to the heart.
And I want to thank everybody for contributing. It's
Thank
been
you.
great.
Thank you. It was
Yeah,
lovely.
it's a wonderful discussion
So,
to end.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Good
okay,
night.
nighty-nighty.
thank you all for.
Bye-bye.
For this, I mean, it's tremendous. Thank you. Night.